Flames shot out from Karen's Tesla, lighting up the quiet suburban street like a 4th of July show gone wrong. The car alarm screamed, the headlights flickered, and somewhere in the chaos I could hear her yelling, "My name, you did this." I just stood on my porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the sparks dance. The smell of burnt plastic and karma mixed perfectly in the night air. But let me back up for a second. This didn't happen out of nowhere. For weeks, my electricity bill had doubled, even though I barely used the AC. Turns out my neighbor, the self-proclaimed eco-saint of our HOA, had been sneaking into my yard every night to charge her Tesla from my outlet. And when the HOA refused to do anything about it, I decided to handle it my own way, one wire at a time. Before we dive into how this little science project went down, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there, and hit subscribe, because trust me, this one's going to get shocking. Maplewood Estates was supposed to be peaceful, tree-lined streets, manicured lawns, kids riding bikes, and retirees waving from porches. But ever since Karen Whitmore moved in 3 years ago, peace had become a luxury. She was the self-appointed environmental sheriff of the HOA, the kind of woman who'd measure your lawn height with a ruler and quote community bylaws from memory while sipping her soy latte. She wasn't officially on the HOA board, oh no, that would have required an election. Karen didn't need that. She had something far more powerful, an endless sense of moral superiority and an audience too exhausted to argue. She'd post long rants on the neighborhood Facebook group about toxic fertilizers and energy waste. She once reported an old man for owning a gas-powered leaf blower, claiming it violated the spirit of eco-compliance. The HOA president, Bill McKenzie, usually caved just to shut her up. Everyone did. I used to ignore her too. I'm a quiet guy, early 50s, retired electrical engineer, mostly keep to myself. My workshop is my happy place, an organized chaos of wires, circuit boards, and half-finished projects. I built my own solar battery bank not because I'm an activist, but because I hate wasting money. Karen, however, saw my garage setup as a violation waiting to happen. The first week she moved in, she knocked on my door with a clipboard in hand and that tight-lipped HOA smile. "Hi, I'm Karen Whitmore. I'm the sustainability liaison for Maplewood," she said proudly, as if that title existed. "I noticed your garage lights stay on until very late. Are those LED-certified bulbs?" I blinked at her, confused. "They're lights. They work. That's all I care about." She frowned, jotting something down. "Well, we take energy efficiency seriously here. I'll let the board know." I thought she was joking. Turns out she wasn't. Over the next few months, I got little notices slipped into my mailbox. "Your exterior lighting exceeds HOA brightness limits. Your recycling bin contains non-recyclable plastics. And once hilariously, your wind chime produces unnecessary noise pollution." It was like living next to a bureaucratic tornado in yoga pants. But I kept my patience until the day my electricity bill doubled. It started small. One month, my bill was about $180, a little higher than usual. I shrugged it off. Maybe the AC ran longer. But the next month, it was $392. I live alone. I barely use the dishwasher. Something was wrong. I went full engineer mode, checked every breaker, unplugged every appliance, ran energy audits using my smart meter app. Everything inside the house checked out. Then I noticed something strange. My usage spiked every night around 2 a.m. for about 3 hours straight. That made no sense. I'm usually asleep by then, and nothing in my system runs automatically at that hour. So one night, I decided to stay up. I turned off all lights, grabbed a mug of black coffee, and sat by my garage window. Around 1, 4, 5 a.m., I saw something move in the shadows. A white car quietly rolled up Karen's Tesla Model Y. The door opened, and there she was in her robe and slippers, carrying what looked like a portable charger cable. I froze watching her walk straight into my yard like she'd done it 100 times. She looked both cautious and entitled, scanning around for cameras, then casually plugging her Tesla into my outdoor socket. The charging light on her car blinked to life. I whispered to myself, "You've got to be kidding me." She leaned against her car, scrolling on her phone while her car drank my electricity. After a few minutes, she smiled, muttered something like saving the planet, and got back into her Tesla to nap while it charged. I couldn't believe it. She was literally stealing power, my power, every night. The next morning, I confronted her on the sidewalk while she was watering her eco-friendly native plants. "Karen," I said calmly, "why were you in my yard last night?" Her eyes widened, then narrowed into that fake innocent glare. "Excuse me, I saw you. You were charging your Tesla from my outlet," she scoffed. "Oh, don't be dramatic. It's just a few kilowatts. The HOA covers community energy sharing, We're supposed to help each other be sustainable. I laughed. Community energy sharing, that's my private socket on my private wall behind my private fence. She crossed her arms. You sound awfully selfish for someone who claims to care about technology. You know the world won't change if people like you hoard energy. That was classic Karen logic, make theft sound like a noble act. I reported the incident to the HOA the next day. The board, of course, was useless. They sent me a generic response. We appreciate your concern, but this seems to be a minor misunderstanding between neighbors. Please resolve it amicably. Amicably, right. Tell that to my $400 bill. I asked for a meeting. During it, Karen showed up with a binder full of nonsense printouts of environmental reports, pictures of solar farms, and quotes about collective sustainability. She even had the nerve to claim that my house was benefiting from her presence since her Tesla represents progress. The HOA president sighed. Maybe you two can work this out privately, Karen smiled sweetly. Of course. I'll make sure he understands our community values. I understood perfectly. The HOA wouldn't lift a finger. Karen could steal power, and they'd call it green sharing. That night I sat in my garage, staring at my workbench, covered in wires and spare parts. My engineering brain was buzzing. If she wanted electricity so badly, maybe it was time she got a taste of real power. I started sketching on a notepad, a small modification to my exterior socket. Nothing dangerous, just educational. A voltage feedback circuit. It would remain dormant unless someone drew an unusually high current like a Tesla charger. When that happened, the circuit would overload itself just enough to trip every smart system in her car. Safe for humans. Fatal for smug electric vehicles. I smiled. Let's call it poetic justice, the green way. But first I needed proof. I set up a hidden camera under the eaves near the outlet. The next few nights, she came back like clockwork, 1:47 a.m. every time. She'd park quietly, plug in charge for hours, and sneak back home before sunrise. The footage was gold, crystal clear, time-stamped, undeniable. I had her. Still, I decided to wait one more night before taking action. I wanted her to feel confident, predictable, like a lab rat who thinks the cheese is free, because the next time she plugged in, the only thing she'd be charging was her lesson. I watched the footage 3 times before my hands stopped shaking. In the glow of the monitor, time moved like molasses. There she was, Karen Whitmore robe, fluttering slippers silent on the grass. The queen of moral outrage sneaking into my yard at 1:47 a.m. on the dot. She fumbled with a cable from a little case she smuggled in, glanced left and right, as if the moon itself might tattle on her, and then plugged into my outlet like it was an extension of her entitlement. The timestamp blinked. The charging indicator on the Tesla lit up. She sat in the driver's seat, face bathed in phone light, scrolling through whatever virtue sign-up form made her feel like a saint. The car hummed. My bill spiked. The next morning she smiled at me over the hedge as if nothing happened. I kept rewinding, searching for a clue I could use in a polite conversation, maybe a nervous twitch, a muttered excuse, anything. Instead, I found the audacity I'd always suspected, and the kind of reckless hypocrisy that could only belong to someone who thought rules were suggestions for other people. That night when I called the HOA office, I tried to play it cool. I have footage showing someone accessing my outdoor outlet and charging their vehicle. I said, letting the word footage hang between us like a gavel. The woman who answered was pleasant and practiced the kind of voice you get when you answer AM radio ads. She offered the prepared response I'd already expected. We'll note it in the file. Please keep lines of communication open. Lines of communication. Right. I'd reported graffiti, mailbox, vandalism, and a suspiciously planted rosemary shrub that turned out to be invasive, all of which got the same refrain. We'll note it. Only Karen's filings ever resulted in action. So I did the thing my wife used to call dramatic, and my old colleagues called pragmatic. I made a spreadsheet. Weeks of electricity usage, timestamps camera, captures neighbors' anecdotes. I plotted patterns and circled 1:47 a.m. in angry red. I printed the footage stills and slipped them into a manila folder. It felt absurd to prepare a case against someone who wore hemp and virtue like armor, but absurdity is a poor deterrent for hypocrisy. I sat on my porch that Saturday evening with my folder and a cup of coffee turned tepid by worry and indignation. Maplewood's quiet folded around me, sprinklers hissed in the distance, a dog barked once and then was shushed by a stern, polite neighbor. Children's bicycles lay abandoned on lawns like small, colorful accusations of normalcy. Then the neighborly chatter started. Linda from 2 houses down leaned over the fence with a grin that made her eyes disappear. We all saw you confronting her last week, she said. Bold of you, really. Behind her, she held up a smartphone showing a gossip thread. Our little HOA group had turned into a circus, and Karen was the ringmaster complaining about its peanuts. You should be careful, she warned, lowering her voice. Not everyone likes being called out. They call her the Sustainability Squad, like it's a fan club. Her smile turned sour. But between us, we're tired of the lectures. And we're tired of paying for someone else's juice. Her words were a balm. The community had been quietly seething for months. People complained about her calling out a kid for leaving a ball on the common green, about her sending passive-aggressive notes about patio furniture, colors about the little humiliations that pile up until a person feels like a target. I walked the neighborhood that afternoon and collected stories like shells on the beach. Mrs. Park said Karen had once run a private audit of the block's recycling bins and scolded a single mother for putting bread in the wrong container. Tom, who runs the lawn service, told me Karen once refused him work because his mower ran on gas. He shrugged and said, "She's got money, she's got time, she's got opinions. Now she had energy too, mine." The moral calculus was complicated. I'm a retired electrical engineer. I know how power flows and how people behave when they assume rules are for everyone else. I also know how desperate civic institutions can be when the optics don't favor them. I could have called the police. I did eventually after 6 weeks of quiet theft. The dispatcher's reply was sympathetic, then procedural, then stalled. "We'll log a report. For theft, you might consider gathering more evidence," which I now had. But the problem wasn't only the theft. It was the idea that someone could quietly victimize neighbors while loudly performing righteousness. The HOA would bury a complaint from a private citizen the way it buries inconvenient emails under more important agendas like flower bed color variants and update to the community garden guidelines. I'd seen it happen. Nothing rattled their inertia like a well-prepared presentation, and I was putting one together. I thought about my options. A public shaming social media and the neighborhood group would work, but it would also expose a lot of petty grudges and could spiral into ugliness. A direct legal approach would be time-consuming and expensive. Suing a neighbor for petty energy theft felt like feeding a bureaucracy when what you really wanted was a mirror. There was an itch, though, a delicious, childish itch that comes from wanting to teach a smug person a lesson in a language they'd understand. Karma for many is a mystical force. For me, it was more satisfying to craft something that made hypocrisy feel immediate and uncomfortable. But I also had lines I wouldn't cross. I am not a vindictive person by nature. I'll tinker, prank, and outmaneuver, but I have always respected two things: people's safety and the law. Whatever I did had to be humane, non-harmful, and non-destructive to anyone but her sense of infallibility. So I refined the aim, expose her shame the behavior with evidence she couldn't deny, and make sure the consequence hit where she prized herself most, her reputation. If she wanted to steal electricity and claim virtue, let the community see the contradiction. I started drafting a plan that looked less like sabotage and more like thorough exposure. First, collate the evidence: timestamps, camera, stills usage, Spike's witness statements. Second, bring it to the HOA meeting with an audience: optics matter. Third, if the HOA still stalled, escalate to the utility company. Energy theft is a crime, and the utility company has tools that a homeowner doesn't. They can trace unauthorized draws and assess tampering. While I assembled my case, I also prepared a contingency that was as much theatrical as tactical. I didn't want to physically damage property. I wanted to create a moment so vivid that it would become the talk of the block, a moment that forced the HOA and the neighbors to confront what for too long had been whispered behind trimmed hedges. I planned to create a sting, an undeniable live-captured incident that would make denial impossible. Not through violence, not through illegal tampering, but through timing, presence, and surprise. I'd be ready when she came again. Camera rolling evidence, compiled community witnesses briefed. I wanted witnesses to see her in the act, not just a grainy clip on my phone. And yes, there was a flare of private amusement at the idea that someone who preached responsibility would be caught in flagrante delicto, hands on a stolen cable, her face lit by the glow of the very thing she claimed to love. I tested nothing that could injure. I rigged nothing that could cause harm. Instead, I fine-tuned the theatrics motion sensors that pinged my phone, a floodlight that would spotlight the scene without blinding anyone, and a neighbor willing to come over at a moment's notice to stand by as a supporting the witness. If I were to shame Karen, I wanted it to be the kind of moment that didn't leave scars, whether on her or on the community. The goal was clarity, not cruelty. Yet when night fell and the air cooled, I felt the old excitement and the old caution in equal measure. There is a strange power in watching the world tilt toward a moment of reckoning you've orchestrated. I told myself that justice, when served carefully, could be a creative act. So I waited, I watched, I refined. The lines on my notepad multiplied timestamps, neighbor contact numbers, a list of what to say at the HOA meeting. The camera's red recording light blinked like a tiny heartbeat. And when the neighborly clock struck 1:47 a.m., I was ready to see whether entitlement could withstand the glaring light of accountability. That night I sat alone in my garage, the soft hum of my soldering station filling the silence. The monitor on my workbench replayed Karen's nightly routine, her Tesla gliding up like a silent predator, headlights off, plugging into my outlet with the precision of a professional thief. I'd spent my whole career as an electrical engineer, designing circuits to make life safer and easier. That night I decided to design one to make it smarter. Not dangerous, never dangerous. Just enough to turn a thief's convenience into a headache she'd never forget. I grabbed my old toolbox, brushed off the dust, and pulled out the essentials: a circuit breaker, a relay switch, and an inline resistor that could choke power when overloaded. My goal was simple: trick the Tesla's smart charging system. Whenever it drew too much current from my line, it would create a feedback surge that tripped the car's internal protection system. No explosion, no injury, just a fried onboard charger and a very confused eco-queen. It was like watching chess pieces fall into place. The more I thought about it, the more poetic it felt. She wanted to preach sustainability while leeching off my power. Well, now she'd experienced some renewable consequences. I spent hours refining the mechanism. I wanted precision, not chaos. The circuit had to look completely ordinary from the outside, just a weatherproof socket, same as any other. But behind the panel, the wires would tell a different story, a perfectly legal modification that responded only to one type of abuse: excessive current draw. And since Karen's Tesla charger pulled more than 30 amps at peak, I knew she'd hit the threshold in under 60 seconds. To anyone else, the socket would behave normally. I even tested it with my power tools, nothing unusual. But to a luxury EV greedily gulping watts, it would be like drinking from a fire hose of karma. As I tightened the last screw and flipped the switch, a small spark jumped, bright, sharp, clean. I smiled. Let's call that a preview. Then came the waiting. I didn't have to wait long. The next evening I pretended to go to bed early. Lights off, house silent. My phone buzzed around 1:40 a.m. Motion detected. I crept into my garage, pulled up the live feed, and there she was again. Karen Whitmore, Maplewood's eco-enforcer, wrapped in a silk robe and armed with her portable charger. She moved with the arrogance of routine, not caution. She'd done this so many times, she didn't even look around anymore. I watched as she crouched by my wall outlet, muttering something to herself, probably another self-congratulatory speech about saving the planet. The plug slid in, the Tesla chirped, and the green charging light blinked to life. Then right on cue, the circuit triggered. At first everything looked fine. The charger light blinked once more, and then froze. The hum of the Tesla's power inverter stuttered, then sputtered. A faint crackle echoed from the cable, followed by a puff of smoke so thin it almost looked harmless. But then snap, a bright spark jumped from the plug, and the Tesla's dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree in panic mode. I could hear the faint beep 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 through the still night. The headlights flickered. The car's touchscreen flashed a big red warning: charging fault detected. Disconnect immediately. Karen screamed. I swear it was the most satisfying sound I'd ever heard in my life. She yanked the plug, stumbled backward, and waved her hands like she'd been attacked by ghosts. Oh my God, she hissed, looking around in the dark. Then she pointed toward my house, muttering something furious, before running back to her driveway. From my monitor, I could see her pacing in front of the Tesla, phone in hand, desperately Googling. Tesla won't charge at 2 in the morning. The car's alarm blared once, then died, leaving only the faint hum of the night and my laughter echoing softly in the garage. I took a slow sip of coffee and whispered, "You wanted power, Karen. You got it." By sunrise, the neighborhood was buzzing, not electrically this time, but socially. Word travels fast in Maplewood, especially when it involves Karen. I didn't have to say a thing. The universe was doing my PR for me. By mid-morning, I saw her standing outside with a Tesla service technician. He popped the hood, frowned, then connected a diagnostic tool. I couldn't hear them, but her face said everything: disbelief, then confusion, then rage. The technician shook his head and gestured toward her outlet, clearly explaining something she didn't like. She started pointing toward my house again, her gestures wild, her tone sharp. The poor guy looked like he wanted to crawl into the earth. An hour later, she stormed up to my porch, red-faced and trembling. "You did something to my car," she snapped. I raised an eyebrow. I did something. You mean besides paying for your charging habit for the last 3 months? Don't you dare twist this. You tampered with your outlet to hurt me. I took a deep breath, keeping my tone calm, almost teacherly. Karen, my outlet is on my property. You're not authorized to use it. Whatever happened while you were trespassing isn't my problem. Maybe your precious Tesla didn't like stealing power from someone who actually knows how circuits work. Her jaw dropped. You think this is funny? My car's fried. Then I guess karma runs on electricity too. She stomped away, nearly tripping over her own charger cable. 2 hours later, I got an email from the HOA. The subject line, Urgent Community Incident, Safety Concern. Here we go. The message said there had been a dangerous electrical event involving my property and that I was required to attend an emergency HOA meeting that evening. I couldn't help but grin. They thought they were summoning me for discipline. In reality, they were walking into a live demonstration of evidence, logic, and poetic justice. That afternoon, I printed stills from my security footage, all of them showing Karen sneaking into my yard, plugging in her car, and stealing power. I also printed my utility statements with timestamps, highlighting the nightly spikes. Finally, I clipped together short video segments, the final one showing her Tesla sparking like a rejected science fair project. When I walked into the HOA clubhouse that evening, the air was thick with tension and gossip. Half the neighborhood was there. Karen sat near the front, flanked by her loyal friend group, the same women who usually nodded whenever she lectured them about composting. She glared at me like I'd burned down her solar farm. Bill, the HOA president, cleared his throat. Mr. Johnson, Mrs. Whitmore alleges that you modified your electrical system in a way that caused damage to her vehicle. We take safety very seriously in Maplewood, I interrupted politely. Oh, I take it seriously too, Bill. That's why I brought evidence. Then I played the footage. The room went silent except for the faint hum of the projector. There was Karen sneaking into my yard, plugging in, smirking, whispering to herself, the timestamp clear as day. A few gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered, "Oh wow." I paused the video right on the frame where the Tesla's charging light flickered out. This, ladies and gentlemen, is what happens when someone decides your property belongs to them. My socket is private. My meter proves the theft. And this, I held up the utility bills, is the proof I paid for her righteousness. Karen jumped to her feet. He sabotaged me. That's illegal. Bill rubbed his forehead. Karen, the video shows you, clearly entering his property without permission. That's not the point, she shouted. I was doing it for sustainability, someone in the back laughed. Then another. Within seconds, the whole room erupted. I leaned back, folded my arms, and smiled. You're right, Karen. You were being sustainable, sustaining yourself on my power. The HOA voted to close the complaint against me. And for the first time, Karen's smug composure cracked completely. As I left the room, I could hear whispers following me out. Did you see her face? Finally, someone shut her down. About time, karma got involved. For the first time in months, Maplewood Estates felt quiet again. Peaceful, balanced. But as I walked home under the soft glow of the streetlights, I couldn't help but smirk. Because deep down I knew this story wasn't quite over yet. The next 48 hours felt like the calm before a thunderstorm. The HOA had dismissed Karen's complaint in record time, and word spread across Maplewood like wildfire. For once, the self-proclaimed eco-enforcer had been publicly humiliated, her spotless green reputation stained by the most unflattering color imaginable embarrassment. But humiliation never sits quietly with people like Karen Whitmore. No humiliation for her was gasoline, and I knew she was about to strike a match. The first sign came the next evening. My security alerts pinged again, this time not at 1:47 a.m., but earlier around 11:30 p.m. I opened the live feed on my phone, expecting a raccoon or a stray cat. But there she was, Karen, marching straight toward my property with a flashlight in one hand and a clipboard in the other. My jaw tightened. She scanned the perimeter of my yard, pretending to take notes, just like she did when she accused the Hendersons of having illegal wind chimes. I watched her walk around the fence, mumbling angrily into her phone, probably calling her little HOA fan club. Then she stopped at the outlet, my outlet. The same one she'd used, the same one she'd sworn she'd never touch again. Oh, don't do it, I muttered to myself. Don't you dare. But Karen wasn't the type to learn. She crouched down, opened her case, and pulled out a new, heavy-duty Tesla charger adapter. She was clearly trying to prove something, maybe that I'd sabotaged community power. Or maybe deep down she couldn't resist the urge to feel victorious again. Either way, I was about to get front row seats to the most electrifying moment in Maplewood history. I started recording. Karen plugged in her new charger with dramatic precision like she was performing surgery. Her Tesla's charge light blinked once, then twice, then froze. A faint click echoed from the socket, the sound of my circuit's overload sensor tripping. At first she looked confused. Then came the smell, a subtle, acrid wisp of melting insulation. The air sizzled faintly. And then boom, a flash burst from the plug like a camera flash from hell. Sparks flew across the driveway, scattering like angry fireflies. Karen screamed, stumbling backward, her clipboard flying into the air. The Tesla's headlights flickered alarm, blaring horn honking uncontrollably in panic mode. Its dashboard glowed crimson, a storm of warnings, charging fault detected. Power surge risk. Service required immediately. For a moment, the entire street was lit up by the chaos alarms, echoing porch lights flicking on, dogs barking from every direction. Karen stood there frozen in her pink bathrobe eyes, wide hair frizzed by static, staring at her smoking Tesla like it had personally betrayed her. And me, I just stood quietly on my porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the show. She finally found her voice. "You did this," she screamed, pointing at me. "You tried to kill me." I calmly took another sip. "Karen, I think your car just had a short circuit. You should really talk to Tesla about quality control. You sabotaged me." You monster," she shrieked. "This is a crime," I shrugged. "Then I suggest you report it. But make sure you tell them where you were standing when it happened on my property." Her face went redder than a fire truck. She stormed off yelling something about lawsuits and federal safety codes. But the truth was already working its way through the neighborhood. Within minutes, people were outside, whispering, phones out, recording the scene. I didn't even have to say a word. The story wrote itself. The same woman who preached about responsibility had just electrocuted her own Tesla while stealing power from her neighbor. The next morning, the memes started. Someone photoshopped Karen's face onto a lightning bolt. Someone else edited her Tesla into a toaster. My favorite was a captioned photo of her mid-scream, "sustainability level overcharged." I should have felt guilty. But honestly, it felt like justice. Of course, the HOA tried to contain the chaos. Bill, the president, called an emergency safety review meeting. But by then, the footage had already spread around the entire community chat group. Even the mildest neighbors, the ones who normally avoided conflict, were laughing. Bill looked exhausted when I arrived at the meeting. "Look," he sighed, "we just want to resolve this quietly. No lawsuits, no drama." Karen slammed her fist on the table. "He could have killed me. My car is totaled. Do you know how much a Tesla costs?" Bill rubbed his temples. "Karen, you were trespassing." "I was testing community infrastructure," she shouted. "You were stealing electricity," I corrected. Again, "It's public property." "It's a private outlet," Bill said, his voice cracking under the absurdity. "You've been told this." She turned on him furious. "You're all covering for him. This neighborhood is corrupt. Anti-environmental, anti-progress." Someone in the back whispered, "Anti-Karen." The room snickered. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Because while she was screaming, I was already holding the trump card. "Karen," I said, standing up, "before you embarrass yourself further, I think you should read this." I handed her a printed email from Tesla Service. I'd obtained it after she tried to accuse me of tampering. It clearly stated, "After reviewing diagnostic logs, we found the vehicle was charged through an unauthorized power source. This constitutes user negligence and voids the warranty for charging-related damage." The room fell silent. Her eyes darted over the page, her lips trembling. This isn't." "It is," I said. "You voided your own warranty. That means Tesla won't cover repairs. And judging by what I saw on the footage, that repair's going to cost you north of $14,000. The sound she made next wasn't a word. It was somewhere between a gasp and a growl. Bill cleared his throat. "I think we can conclude this meeting." But Karen wasn't done. "I'll sue. You'll see, I'll take this entire HOA down." "Funny," I said, "because they're part of the problem too." Her head snapped toward me. "What did you say?" I smiled. "See, I checked something interesting. The HOA charter never approved any sustainability initiative involving community power sharing. Meaning, every time you claim the HOA authorized you to plug into someone's property, you were lying. And if anyone supported that, they were complicit in energy theft." Bill's face went pale. Karen's eyes flickered with sudden panic. "No, I didn't." "Oh, don't worry," I continued. "I already sent the evidence to the utility company this morning. They seemed very interested." The silence that followed was glorious. Karen sank into her chair, speechless for the first time in her life. The meeting ended in chaos, board members whispering, neighbors smirking, and Karen storming out, muttering something about moving somewhere more progressive. That evening, I sat back on my porch, watching the sun dip below the rooftops. For the first time in months, I could hear actual silence. No lectures, no emails, no HOA notices. Just the peaceful hum of a neighborhood finally free from its self-appointed saint. But as I leaned back in my chair, the faintest sound of static drifted through the air, my motion alert buzzing softly. I opened the app out of habit. No Karen this time. Just the faint glow of my garage light, steady, safe, and entirely mine. And for the first time since this all began, I smiled not from revenge, but from peace. The next morning, the neighborhood looked like a calm crime scene. Karen's Tesla sat in her driveway like a wounded animal, hood popped, charging port scorched, and a faint chemical smell still lingering in the air. Even the morning joggers slowed down to stare. Someone had taped a handwritten sign on her mailbox overnight. It read, "Caution. Unauthorized power may be hazardous to your health." No one admitted to writing it, but I had a few guesses. By noon, every doorstep in Maplewood Estates had the same glossy paper tucked under the mat: Emergency HOA Safety Meeting Mandatory Attendance. The agenda line underneath said only 2 words: electrical incident. I laughed out loud. Apparently, the HOA had gone from ignoring me to panicking overnight. It was almost flattering. When I arrived at the clubhouse that evening, the atmosphere was thick with tension and curiosity. The folding chairs were filled, retirees, families, even a few teenagers pretending not to care. Everyone wanted to witness the fallout. Karen sat at the front, arms crossed, wearing a pale green blazer that matched her Tesla's melted charging cable lying dramatically at her feet like a trophy of victimhood. Her eyes shot daggers at me the moment I walked in. Bill, our tired HOA president, looked like he'd aged 10 years since the last meeting. He tapped his pen against the table and said, "We're here to discuss the recent electrical incident between residents Mr. Johnson and Mrs. Whitmore." "Incident?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "That's a very polite way to describe someone trespassing onto my property at midnight to steal power." "Objection," Karen shouted before he could respond. "This man intentionally wired a death trap on his property. He could have electrocuted me," the crowd murmured. I folded my arms. "Karen, I'm an electrical engineer, not a comic book villain. My setup was perfectly safe for anyone who wasn't committing felony theft." She slammed her hand on the table. "You think you're clever, don't you? You humiliated me in front of everyone." A woman in the back whispered loudly, "You did that yourself, honey." The room chuckled. Bill cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Let's stick to facts. Mrs. Whitmore, you were recorded entering Mr. Johnson's property and using his power outlet without permission. Is that correct?" Karen blinked rapidly. "It was a community resource. I was leading our sustainability program, which doesn't exist," I interjected, handing Bill a printed copy of the HOA charter. "There's no sustainability clause or green energy committee. She made it up." Bill flipped through the pages, frowned, and nodded. "He's right. There's no such authorization." A ripple of laughter swept the room. Karen's cheeks went scarlet. "But he still sabotaged my car," she barked. "That's a felony." Tesla disagrees, I said, calmly pulling out another paper, the warranty void letter. "They ruled it was your fault. You used an unauthorized, unsafe power source. You fried your own car, Karen." Gasps filled the room. Someone actually clapped. Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I turned to Bill. "Now I'd like to submit a counter-complaint. Not only for trespassing, but for months of unauthorized utility use. I've documented over $1, 200 inches, excess power consumption. That's theft." Bill looked uncomfortable. Let's not escalate this into legal territory just yet." "Why not?" I said, smiling. "It already is. The utility company contacted me this morning. They've confirmed repeated unauthorized power draws from my meter. They're filing a report. Apparently, energy theft is a state offense." That silenced the room. Even the air conditioner seemed to stop humming. Karen looked around, desperate for support. "You people can't be serious. I was trying to help this neighborhood. I'm the only one who cares about the environment." Linda, from 2 houses down, stood up. "Karen, caring about the environment doesn't mean stealing from your neighbors." Another neighbor chimed in, "Or writing fake violation notices." "Oh, and harassing kids about recycling," added Mr. Park. "You told my granddaughter she was killing dolphins because she used a straw." A few people actually booed. Karen's composure cracked. She looked at me, voice trembling. "You've turned everyone against me." I shrugged. "No, Karen. You did that all by yourself. I just plugged the truth into the outlet." That line got a laugh so loud the ceiling tiles trembled. Bill sighed heavily. "All right. The board has reviewed the evidence. Mr. Johnson's property modification was legal and safe. Mrs. Whitmore's repeated trespassing and unauthorized use of private utilities constitute a violation of Section 4B, personal property infringement. He looked at her sympathetically. Karen, we're issuing a fine of $2,000 and a 6-month suspension of HOA privileges. What? She screeched. You can't suspend me. I am the HOA. Bill rubbed his temples. No, Karen, you're just loud. The meeting adjourned amid half-suppressed laughter. Karen stormed out, slamming the door so hard the lights flickered. I lingered a few minutes longer, chatting with neighbors who suddenly found me more approachable than ever. It was amazing how quickly people shift when the local tyrant falls. They asked me for electrical tips, advice on home solar systems. One even joked about installing Karen-proof outlets. By the next morning, word had spread beyond Maplewood. Local gossip blogs had picked it up. Eco-HOA leaders Tesla freed after power theft incident. The comments were merciless. Someone posted, looks like karma runs on 240 volts. Another said, finally, an HOA story with a happy ending. For the next few days, Karen kept her blinds closed and her car under a tarp. She stopped walking, her dog stopped patrolling for violations, stopped existing as the self-appointed conscience of Maplewood, but silence only lasts so long. 1 week later, a certified letter arrived in my mailbox, a small claims lawsuit. Karen was suing me for damages to her Tesla, emotional distress, and defamation. I almost laughed coffee through my nose. 2 weeks later, we were in county court. She walked in wearing a beige suit, 2 sizes too confident. Her attorney looked like a man who regretted every career decision that led him here. When the judge asked for my side, I calmly handed over my evidence, timestamps, videos, HOA rulings, the Tesla report. The judge watched the footage twice, then looked at Karen. Mrs. Whitmore, you entered this man's property without consent. I was performing a community service, she stammered. The judge's eyebrow twitched. By charging your personal vehicle from his home, she opened her mouth, then closed it. Case dismissed. She was ordered to pay court fees. The look on her face when the gavel came down could have powered a small city. When I left the courthouse, half the neighborhood was waiting outside. Someone had brought donuts. Linda handed me a coffee and said, to poetic justice and to never letting a Karen near your outlet again. The HOA tried to restore order, but it was too late. Karen's fall from grace was the talk of every barbecue, every walking group, every morning coffee chat. She'd gone from Maplewood's sustainability ambassador to the power thief. And the best part, she'd done it all to herself. That night, I sat on my porch again, watching the sunset flicker through the maple trees. I plugged in my own electric mower, perfectly within code, perfectly on my own dime, and smiled. Across the street, Karen's house was dark. Her Tesla was gone towed earlier that day for repairs she couldn't afford. Maybe now I thought the neighborhood could finally breathe. But part of me knew people like Karen don't vanish. They recharge. And something told me she wasn't quite done yet. For a few peaceful weeks, Maplewood Estates felt almost normal again. No midnight trespassing, no lectures about composting, no unsolicited HOA inspections. The air felt lighter. Neighbors actually waved at each other again, instead of pretending to check their mailboxes when Karen walked by. But as every seasoned homeowner knows, peace in an HOA neighborhood never lasts long. It started quietly. One morning I found a folded paper on my porch, typed unsigned. Enjoy your little victory, thief. The truth always comes out. The irony made me laugh. She was calling me the thief now. But what really caught my eye was the font. It was the exact one Karen used for all her HOA memos. Arial, narrow size, 11 bolded headings. Old habits die hard. I tossed it in the trash, assuming it was just the last sputter of her indignation. But over the next week, 3 more letters appeared, each nastier than the last. The second accused me of tampering with neighborhood utilities. The third claimed I'd illegally rewired my property to siphon energy from the grid. And the fourth was just one line: the county will come knocking soon. That one made me pause. See, threats are one thing. Bureaucratic threats are another. They meant Karen was trying to weaponize paperwork again, her favorite form of warfare. Sure enough, 2 days later, a white county vehicle rolled up in front of my house. Out stepped a man in a safety vest, clipboard in hand, looking uncomfortable. "Afternoon, sir," he said. "We received an anonymous complaint about illegal wiring and power redistribution." I smiled grimly. "Let me guess, from a woman who drives a Tesla, wears too much perfume, and can't mind her own business." He smirked, clearly aware of who I meant. "We can't discuss that, sir. Just need to take a quick look." "Be my guest," I said, leading him around the side of the house. He inspected the outlet, the infamous one. I explained the modification in detail, a perfectly legal circuit with built-in overload protection. Nothing dangerous, nothing non-compliant. I even showed him the documentation from my manufacturer. When he was done, he looked almost disappointed that he couldn't find anything wrong. "Everything checks out," he said, signing off the form. "Honestly, whoever filed this report wasted our time. Happens a lot around here." Some neighborhoods get passionate. "Try pathological," I said. He laughed, handed me a copy of the report, and left. But I wasn't laughing. I knew Karen wasn't done. This wasn't just revenge, this was her trying to reset control, and that's when I decided it was time to end this. For good. I started digging. Not in my yard, in the HOA archives. Most people don't realize that HOA records are public to residents, and Karen had left a paper trail as long as the interstate. Every complaint, every policy suggestion, every personal note disguised as official communication, all of it was logged. It didn't take long to find what I needed. Among the records was a file labeled Community Sustainability Fund. Supposedly, it was an HOA initiative that Karen had set up to promote clean energy programs. She'd been collecting small voluntary donations from residents for over a year, $10 or $20 here and there, claiming it would go toward community solar panels and green grants. There was only one problem: no such fund was ever authorized by the HOA board. And according to the treasurer's spreadsheet, all the money had been dispersed to one account, hers. Bingo. I nearly dropped my coffee. Karen hadn't just been stealing electricity, she'd been running a fake environmental fund right under the HOA's nose. So I called Linda, my favorite neighborhood gossip and unofficial information broker. Within an hour, the news was circulating faster than wildfire. By sundown, everyone knew. The next day, I filed a formal request for an HOA audit. Bill, our weary president, called me within minutes. "Do you have to stir things up again, Johnson Bill?" I said. "She's been collecting money for a fake project and funneling it into her own account. That's embezzlement, not gossip." He sighed. "Send me what you've got." "Oh, I sent it, all of it. Screenshots, spreadsheets, even the PayPal history some residents forwarded to me after hearing what she'd done." By that evening, another emergency meeting was announced. This time, Karen didn't get to sit at the front. When she walked in, every eye in the room followed her. She tried to smile, but it came out like a grimace. Bill began reading the findings in his monotone HOA voice. "It appears funds labeled under Community Sustainability were collected under false pretenses and deposited into a private account belonging to Mrs. Whitmore." Karen stood up, her voice trembling. "That's not what happened. I was holding the money temporarily until we got approval from the county." Bill sighed. "There are no records of any county submissions. And according to bank statements, those funds were used for," he flipped the paper, "Tesla charging equipment, garden renovations, and a wellness retreat in Sedona." The room erupted. Karen's voice cracked. "That was research I was developing ecotherapy initiatives," Linda shouted from the back. "You mean massages and margaritas?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Bill raised his hand. "Enough. The board has already voted. Effective immediately, Mrs. Whitmore is stripped of all HOA privileges and fined for embezzlement and repeated code violations. We're forwarding this to county authorities for review." Karen froze, color draining from her face. "You can't, you wouldn't, I can," Bill said quietly, "and frankly, we should have done it months ago." She turned toward me, eyes blazing. "You did this, you set me up," I smiled. "No, Karen. You set yourself up. I just turned the lights on." Her voice rose into a shriek. "You think you've won. You think this makes you better than me." I leaned forward slightly. "No, but it sure makes me happier." The laughter that followed was unstoppable. Karen stormed out, slamming the door so hard one of the fluorescent lights above flickered, fitting, really considering her obsession with energy. A week later, the county audit confirmed everything. Karen had collected nearly $9 0 donations that she'd spent on personal luxuries. The district attorney didn't press criminal charges. She agreed to repay the money to avoid prosecution, but her reputation was fried worse than her Tesla. By the time the dust settled, her house had a for sale sign on the lawn. Rumor was she'd moved to another city to start fresh. The morning after the sign went up, I brewed a pot of coffee, stepped out onto my porch, and watched the moving truck pull away. For the first time in years, the cul-de-sac was quiet, truly quiet. No surveillance, no threats, no passive-aggressive eco-tips taped to our doors. Linda waved from across the street. "Looks like the witch is gone." I grinned. "Guess she finally ran out of power." She laughed. "You're terrible." "Maybe," I said, sipping my coffee, "but at least I pay my own electric bill." The HOA, trying to rebuild its image, appointed a new community committee. This time, a legitimate one, to actually install solar panels at the community center. They even asked me to help design the electrical layout. I accepted. We finished the project a few months later. During the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Bill made a corny joke about turning over a new leaf, and everyone laughed. For once it felt genuine. As we flipped the switch and the solar array hummed to life, I thought about Karen wherever she was, probably lecturing a new batch of poor souls about shared sustainability. I didn't hate her, not anymore. People like her burn themselves out, eventually consumed by their own self-importance. But I'll admit, every time I plug in my new lawnmower, I still glance at that old outlet and smile. Because that's where the balance of power was restored. It's funny how a single outlet can change the energy of an entire neighborhood, literally and figuratively. Months passed after Karen's dramatic exit, and Maplewood Estates began to feel like a different world. No more unsolicited HOA emails, no more 3 a.m. power-saving tips, no more tense stares over hedge heights or lawn fertilizer. For the first time in years, our little community finally exhaled. The silence felt like freedom. I'd wake up early, brew my coffee, and step onto the porch to watch the sunrise hit the maple trees that gave the place its name. The morning air carried birdsong instead of complaint echoes. People waved when they walked by. Even the HOA meetings, which used to feel like courtroom battles, now ended with laughter and snacks. And yet every time I passed the old power outlet by the side of my garage, I'd smile to myself. Not because of revenge, that part was long over, but because that small patch of wall reminded me of something bigger the moment the entire neighborhood decided to stop living under one person's control. Bill, our worn-out HOA president, had resigned a few weeks after Karen left. He said he'd had enough drama to power a city. I didn't blame him. The new board was led by Linda and a few practical neighbors who cared more about keeping the lawns tidy than running people's lives. They asked me to join as a technical consultant for energy projects, not an officer, thank God, just the guy they could call when a fuse blew or a committee got ambitious about light bulbs. The first project under the new leadership was small but symbolic solar-powered community lamps along the walking trail, a real sustainability project with transparent budgeting and volunteer labor. No egos, no fake titles, no secret funds, just people working together. The grand opening night was simple: paper lanterns, lemonade stands, kids running with glow sticks. When we switched on the lights, the whole path glowed in warm amber. The crowd cheered and someone joked, "Let's hope this time nobody fries their Tesla." I laughed along, though deep down that chapter of my life felt like a different era, almost like watching an old movie of yourself making all the right mistakes. A week later, while cleaning out the garage, I found the folder, the one with all the evidence from the Great Power War. Old screenshots, energy charts, HOA notices, even a still photo of Karen mid-scream beside her sparking car. I should have thrown it away right then, but for some reason I hesitated. Maybe part of me knew that stories like this weren't just personal. They were reminders of how quickly control can creep into everyday life disguised as good intentions. I placed the folder in a box labeled Lessons Learned and tucked it high on a shelf. A month later, a surprise letter arrived in my mailbox. No return address, no stamp, just a folded envelope slipped inside by hand. My stomach tightened when I saw the handwriting. Karen's. I stood there for a long moment, staring at it, half expecting it to smell like lavender hand lotion and resentment. When I finally opened it, the first line made me blink. You were right. It wasn't a long letter, maybe half a page. She didn't apologize outright, but between the lines I could feel the cracks in her armor. She said she'd moved to Arizona, started volunteering with a real environmental group, and was trying to do things differently. Then in her usual dramatic flourish, she wrote, "Power can corrupt anyone, even those who think they're saving the world." Maybe I needed to be unplugged to learn that. For once, I didn't laugh. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the same box as the evidence folder. Not out of forgiveness, but out of closure. People don't change easily. But maybe, just maybe, Karen had learned that righteousness without humility is just arrogance in disguise. Spring came early that year. Maplewood was alive again, garden parties, potlucks, even a neighborhood barbecue hosted on my driveway. The same neighbors who once avoided eye contact now leaned on my fence, swapping stories about kids' work and the legend of Tesla Karen. It had become local folklore, told half as a joke, half as a warning. Linda would always finish it with the same line, "And that, kids, is why you never steal power from an engineer." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, it was communal, healing. Later that night, as the party died down and the smell of charcoal faded, I sat on my porch with a beer staring at the quiet street. I thought about everything that had happened, the absurdity, the anger, the sparks, the laughter, the lessons. When I first caught Karen stealing electricity, I wanted justice. What I didn't realize was that the real power I needed wasn't in circuits or wires, it was in boundaries. Because in life, energy isn't just electricity, it's time, patience, kindness. If you let people drain it without consequence, sooner or later you'll find yourself empty. Setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's self-respect. And maybe that's the real story here, not about revenge or HOA drama, but about reclaiming your peace when someone tries to take it. The next morning I installed a new sign above the infamous outlet. Nothing fancy, just a small metal plaque that read, "Private power, respect the current." It made me smile every time I saw it. Neighbors loved it too. Some asked where they could get one for their own homes. It became a running joke, "Respect the current," turned into Maplewood's unofficial motto. Someone even printed it on coffee mugs for the HOA fundraiser. That's when I realized sometimes revenge doesn't destroy, it transforms. It sparks something bigger. Karen's downfall had accidentally inspired a whole community to get better, to be more transparent, kinder, less self-righteous. And ironically, that was probably the kind of change she always claimed to want. She just never understood it couldn't come from control, only connection. A few weeks later, I got a package in the mail. Inside was a small, solar-powered desk lamp and a note written in neat, careful handwriting to Mr. Johnson, from one power enthusiast to another. "Consider this piece, not penance." KW, I laughed, shaking my head. Maybe it was genuine. Maybe it was her way of saying she finally learned the difference between taking energy and creating it. Either way, it felt like the last jolt of closure I needed. I placed the lamp on my desk. It still sits there today, quietly soaking up sunlight, quietly glowing when the world goes dark. And every time I turn it on, I think about how wild it is that a war over a wall socket ended up lighting up an entire neighborhood's sense of humor, and maybe even its heart. At the end of the day, power comes in many forms: electricity, influence, pride. But the real question isn't who has it, it's how they use it. Karen believed power meant control, that rules and righteousness made her untouchable. But she forgot the simplest law of energy: everything you send out eventually returns. Steal from others, and the circuit of karma will complete itself. We all meet Karens in life, people who push boundaries, take what isn't theirs, and justify it in the name of what's right. But sometimes the best response isn't anger or revenge. It's calm, intelligent boundaries, the kind that shock them with accountability. So if someone's been draining your energy literally or metaphorically, don't let them keep plugging in. Protect your peace, stand firm, and remember, you control your own current. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in my place? Comment below, let me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more HOA stories where justice always finds a way to stay grounded. Because in this neighborhood, karma's just another kind of electricity, and trust me, it never forgets to charge.